MarTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone, welcome. This is MarTechTalk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. We are here today to talk about the risks and rewards of deploying AI in marketing communications. Now, deploying AI in marketing communications offers a number of important benefits and opportunities, but it also comes with certain risks and challenges. Among the benefits, certainly big benefits can be found in the areas of content creation and personalization. AI can assist in generating content such as product descriptions, blog posts, social media updates, you name it. And the personalization tools enable marketers to create highly personalized content and messages based upon individual users and preferences. And this can lead to improved customer engagement and conversion rates. In terms of customer engagement, AI can help there as well. AI-driven chatbots and virtual assistants can provide instant customer support and enhance user experiences, leading to hopefully improved customer satisfaction. On the data side, there are a number of important capabilities with AI that we should consider. Certainly, AI can process vast amounts of information and data to provide insights into customer behavior, help us make better data-driven decisions and refine our marketing strategies. In fact, we covered some of this in our last episode of MarTech Talk, as well as AI-powered predictive analytics models that can forecast customer behavior, and AI algorithms that continually test and optimize marketing campaigns in real time, helping us improve campaign performance over time. These are just a few of the benefits, but there are also a number of risks we should consider when using AI, especially when it comes to customer data and marketing data. Of course, privacy concerns top that list. And speaking of data, data quality is also a concern and risk. AI relies heavily on data quality, so garbage in, garbage out, as they say. And if data used to train AI models is either incomplete or biased or inaccurate, it can lead to flawed marketing strategies. And don't forget, like all data systems, AI systems can be vulnerable to cyber attacks, and we know those are becoming more sophisticated with every passing day. And finally, it's the cost. Cost is a risk. Implementing AI in marketing communications often requires specialized skills and infrastructure and financial investments, which can be a barrier for some organizations. So while AI in marketing communications can provide significant rewards, there are also a number of risks to consider. And that's what we'll be discussing today with a great panel of guests. What are some of the best practices we should consider? And how can we leverage AI in ways that really make a difference? So all of that in just a second. But first, before I introduce our guests, I do want to say that we want to hear from you too. We'd like to encourage everyone here attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way for our guests, please enter them into the chat feature. That's where I'll be looking for questions. And we will attempt to get some of them into the flow of the show today. And we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. All right, let's get to our great panel of guests today, starting with Diana Petrova. Diana, are you with us?
Yes, hi,
Hello,
Kevin.
Diana.
Lovely to be here again.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. Now, Diana has been working in digital and tech for the last 14 years, specializing in travel brands. She's former VP of Digital and Marketing at Trafalgar Travel, and she's a huge believer in what AI can bring to the table for direct-to-consumer brands. But you may not know that Diana was also named one of the top London Instagrammers to follow by the Evening Standard for 2 years in a row. Wow, Diana, what kinds of things do you post about on Instagram?
Well, it definitely wasn't about AI back then. It was all about empty London and dreamy pictures. So yeah, I used to love waking up very early in the mornings and go and take photos of London while it was still sleeping. And we could see the city through the lens and kind of my eyes of seeing it with no tourists, with no people. And, you know, I just used to find this very romanticized view of the city.
Oh, that's wonderful, Deanna. Well, thank you for being with us today. Joining Deanna is Nicola Minders. Nicola, are you with us?
Hi, yes, I am, Kevin.
Ah, there you are, Nicola. Great. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, Nicola is a global marketing director at Yonkers and a B2B tech marketing expert who works with generative AI, leveraging the technology and sharing her experiences. Indeed, Nicola, you say that you wish better machine translation technology had been around when you wrote your books in English and Dutch. It would have shaved years off your research and writing, shaved years off your life. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, I wrote my books in my free time, as we have so much as a marketer. And yeah, it was very time consuming to research. And I actually found different information when I was researching in Dutch that when I was researching in English. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm just joining as a humble marketer here, happy to share my experiences, my triumphs and my fails as we go along. I think I'm certainly not an expert or keeping my finger on the pulse, but I'm just fascinated and awe-inspired by how much generative AI in particular has come on in the last year, and it's really starting to influence marketing communications. So I'm happy to talk about that today.
Oh, great. Thank you, Nicola. We're looking forward to having your perspective today. Also joining us is Henry Eider. Henry, are you with us?
Oh, hi.
Hello, Henry. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much for being with us today. Henry is a globally recognized expert, advisor, and presenter on generative AI. He's led pioneering research at institutions like MIT and others, and you've seen him in places like CNN, BBC, the New York Times. But despite these accomplishments, Henry says that he's currently trying and failing to learn how to make Shanghai soup dumplings. Henry, what's the secret to a good dumpling?
Well, the secret seems to be not allowing the soup to essentially leave the dumpling before it's finished cooking, which is where I'm struggling. I have the good fortune in my hometown of Cambridge, UK, of having some incredible Chinese restaurants that make the most exquisite xiaolongbao, the dumplings. And I feel like maybe it's best that I leave it to the experts at this stage.
Well, it sounds good. I will try them anytime and be your guinea pig, Henry. Thank you so much for being with us today. And finally, Anthony Cousins. Ant, are you with us today?
I'm here. Thank you.
Hello, Ant. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much for being with us. Ant has been working in comms and technology for the government and in startups for the last 23 years, with 10 of the last years specializing in AI. Indeed, he is the executive director of AI strategy for Cision. But a little known fact about Ant, you once did an interview as David Cameron live on Afghan national TV. What? How did that happen?
I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think I was the guy who was going to the media tent to explain that David Cameron had decided at the last minute he wasn't going to do the interview. And I think just because to an Afghan this is close enough. So they assumed I was David Cameron, and they started asking me the questions as if I was him, and felt wrong to empty seat ourselves. So I just did the interview. And I thought it'd be better to do that than to kind of ignore the questions. So yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, you should have no trouble then today. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. It is my pleasure to be with you today. All right. To get us started, I'd like to draw our attention to an article published by BBC this week. And indeed, it's all over the international news today, where Tom Hanks, the actor, warns us that a dental plan ad using his image is an AI fake. The video in the advert appears to be Tom Hanks, but indeed is actually an AI-generated video in his likeness. His image and likeness have been used without his consent. Now, as AI systems have grown in power and sophistication, so have concerns about their ability to create ever more realistic virtual versions of real people. These are called deep fakes. Tom is not the only public figure targeted by these deep fakes. In fact, did I hear that Oprah Winfrey was also targeted? Tell me more. But of course, this is causing increased concerns. And there is some action being taken. Indeed, in September, Google announced that it would require any political adverts that run on its platform to disclose if they had been created with AI. So that's a start and an important one. But my question to the group is, what do you feel the implications are to marketing professionals? And where do you feel the future leads with respect to these AI-generated likenesses and deep fakes? Deanna, I'll start with you. What do you think about this whole Tom Hanks story?
I mean, it's really interesting. Actually, I listened to a podcast today. It's called 10% Happier Every Day. And it was very random that actually the conversation was about AI all of a sudden, a little bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the chats that the host had with his guest, and apologies, I'm really bad with names, so I don't remember who they were. But what they were saying was, conspiracy theories, okay? And bear with me on this one, it's not gonna go crazy,
Okay.
but conspiracy theories are really, really interesting to study because they get the facts wrong, but the emotion right. And I think this is a little bit of the world we are facing with all this that's happening in Tom Hanks and a lot of the discussions around actors about, you know, how you can use somebody's face, voice, mimics and everything, and then just create an ad knowing that emotionally we as humans would respond to, like, let's say a famous person or some ideology that you know, reflects on your beliefs and so on, everything you've googled out there. Like, you know, we all know that we receive a personalized version of the internet, and I think this is one of the challenges. It's a, you know, it's sad to start on a challenging note about AI in a sense, but this is one of the big challenges that we'll be facing in the very near future, I think, starting to distinguish what's true and what isn't. It's really boundless opportunities for marketers, but then there is a lot about ethics and legislation that needs to go in there. And how does the consumer get protected and the everyday person just starting to differentiate, like, between what's real and what isn't? Because to your point, that video is like, I wouldn't have known it's not Tom Hanks. Obviously, if I just kind of glanced at it, I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. And I think we're facing a lot of this coming ahead of us.
Well, interesting that it is Tom Hanks that was chosen. Maybe this isn't the first, but certainly the first kind of breakthrough one that we're hearing about. Tom Hanks, at least in the United States here, is a very highly trusted individual. So it makes sense maybe that Tom Hanks was targeted with this ad. Nicola, what's your take on this Tom Hanks story? Do you feel like this is just the beginning?
I do think it's the beginning. I mean, I think it's a lawyer's field day in many ways. It's you know, it's your copyright, your image. It is an actual human identity. It goes much further than something I wrote or something I shared. It's an actual person that you're imitating and copying and mimicking, and it could be used to reap, you know, chaos. And you know, thankfully it was just a dental ad. It could, you know, but it, you know, then somebody's trying to make money out of somebody else's image. So I think, you know, there are many sort of things and areas of plagiarism that just sort of like are open for discussion. So, for example, with Midjourney, you can create images. But if you say it's in the style of Dali, it's in the style of Banksy, you know, he's actually spent a lot of time coming up with the creations and the ideas that they have. And you're just sort of standing on the shoulders of somebody else's creativity. For your own gain. And I think there's a lot of sort of this, you know, debate that will happen, legal issues that will open up. I also saw on TikTok an advert from Tesla, or a post from Tesla, where they have a sales outbound conversation, and that is done by AI. And again, I was also struck. I found it incredibly well done. You know, sort of like, wow, it sounded relatively human. There was a slight gap before he said anything, and yet it sounded very good. And you're just sort of like, wow, this is going to replace call centers the world over. But also I thought, do we have to inform people? Just like you're saying, your call is going to be recorded. Do we have to inform people and say, actually, you're talking to an AI bot? Because I think you kind of want to know, you know, do you feel like you're being duped afterwards if you suddenly realize, actually, I was just in a call with a chatbot. You know, it's sort of, there's a lot to be discussed with that.
It is a big topic. It kind of opens up a big Pandora's box. Henry, will it take some sort of legislation to regulate this type of activity? Where is the future heading in terms of these AI generated likenesses?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. I mean, I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just slightly push back on the idea that this is a beginning. It's not a beginning. This has been going on for quite some time in terms of synthetic impersonation facial reenactment in real time, avatar-driven facial identification, things like this. Synthetic voice as well. We've seen, particularly in the crypto sphere, people creating, videos of Elon Musk or Donald Trump, other figures endorsing certain projects. This week alone, we've obviously seen this Tom Hanks example. We've also seen Mr. Beast, one of the biggest, well, arguably the biggest YouTuber, posting about his likeness being used in a similar capacity. Stephen Fry, famous British actor, cultural figure, talking about his voice being cloned to read audiobooks and to narrate a documentary. And so there's fundamentally a problem with the fact that we live in a world now where all of our biometric data is, particularly if you're a public individual, is freely available. These models require less data than they used to generate more realistic outputs than they used to be able to. And so you have a situation where commodification of the models that generate this content plus easily accessible data is essentially a Wild West. And to your question around legislation, yes, there are legislative approaches that could be taken here. And there are some that are already being discussed. I think, as Nicholas said, disclosure is one thing, and it's a really interesting one for marketers to consider. If I create an AI advert with consent from Tom Hanks, but the audience know it's AI generated, will that lessen the impact of that advert? But the kind of more bleak side of things is really, there isn't really a tight legal framework about rights to your actual likeness. There are rights to instances of your image being taken, which is why, for example, Dua Lipa got sued by a photographer who took a photograph of her, which she then posted, right? But actually kind of protecting your likeness in that way, currently the law doesn't capture it. But I guess more worryingly, there isn't a huge amount that can be done if it's an anonymous, quite shady project using your likeness in this way. Maybe if it's a local dental clinic, it's different. But fundamentally, this is a very, very challenging space for talent and for public figures to understand how can you protect your likeness effectively, and essentially what can the law really do. At the moment, unfortunately, it seems like there's not a huge amount that can stop it happening in the first place.
Well, we've been talking about the downsides of this, and certainly plenty. But there could be some cool upsides. Maybe I'm Tom Hanks, and I'm happy to license my likeness for advertisements. Maybe I'm a marketing director of an organization, and I'm happy to create AI likenesses of as opposed to using a live actor. What are some of the upsides and the opportunities of this? Ant, I believe you are muted. We cannot hear you. The upside is that this is really an AI bot. This is not really Ant Cousins, and some of the programming is not correct here. What's the upside, Ant? There's got to be some upsides that we can see in this as well.
Yeah, so for every new technology, right, there's always risks and rewards. And then I think for every, maybe not for every Tom Hanks story, you've got a Bruce Willis story, right? So Bruce Willis kind of knowingly, willingly licensed his likeness, his image for use in content like this, because he's unable to act anymore. So it's entirely conceivable that in Die Hard 12, right, 30 years from now, we could be getting flashbacks to Bruce Willis, and his estate is still kind of making money from that, because he established that a persona that people still want to use. And I think that that's not just about kind of maybe you're ill, you're unable to work for a period of time, but it's also because of scheduling. For other reasons, there's the potential that you could be kind of monetizing the persona or the gravitas or the value you've created over time. You could be monetizing that in a more effective way later on. And obviously brands, given their interest in kind of using influencers, celebrities in campaigns, there's actually an opportunity there that it could be entirely licensed and entirely kind of well thought through. The challenge becomes, I think, more to the point other people have mentioned, that we need to do that in the right way for the consumers. So if we are using that kind of content, when is it appropriate to make sure that that content is labeled appropriately so people know that it is AI generated, and when is it not appropriate? So, for example, I think it is entirely fine for if you're using something like a ChatGPT to generate text, I think it's entirely fine for you to use that in a situation where it doesn't really make much difference to the end consumer, whether or not you wrote that or an AI wrote that. Where it is inappropriate is to use that kind of content in a situation where the user expects that to be a human. So I think the Tesla example is a good one, where the human might be expecting or feeling like they are talking to a human, and that's more like deception, to be using an AI chatbot without revealing that, as opposed to if you're using it to generate social media content, right? Where realistically doesn't matter that that was generated with a human or in conjunction with a human or entirely by AI. It doesn't matter to the human consuming it. It's about the feeling of deception, I think, and the labeling. That's the kind of stuff we need to work through. But ultimately, there's plenty of opportunities here for us to use AI-generated content in a more willful, kind of intentional manner, as well as the harmful stuff we've just talked about.
All right. Well, let's talk about that, which brings us to our first point today. How are Marcoms using AI now? How can we use AI in ways that are ethical and productive? What's to come in the future? Deanna, from your perspective, coming from the travel industry, how do you feel that Marcoms are effective at using AI? And we're not talking about just chat bots or images. We're talking about content generation, analytics, these kinds of things that can be a great benefit. From your point of view, how are Marcoms using AI now? And what should we be considering as we move into the near future with using AI in marketing communications?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to kind of start digging deeper into the practicalities of it. And irrespective if it's travel or just like, let's just say it's a direct to consumer type of industry, you know, I think the implications, at least in my view, in the coming, let's say 12 months around CRM and paid media are probably where you have the low hanging fruit, where you can start optimizing significantly. And practically go down the route of segmentation, personalization, and efficiency, which we cannot really get to with the human input that's needed across these channels at the moment, and just the actual desire from a human consumer level to practically consume content that is personalized to us at this point, because we now expect whatever we see on the internet or products to be targeted at us specifically. So, you know, I just think that around these areas, we are going to see the biggest changes coming. And because you asked me at the moment, I would say that at the moment, I haven't really seen anyone doing anything like significantly crazy within, like, I'll put the travel industry in specific. Like, I haven't necessarily seen or used a specific I don't know, chatbot or anything that has like blown my mind. And I've said, okay, you can't replace the human at this point, because I think there is a lot of legacy in a lot of industries. I think somebody earlier mentioned the aspect of data. I mean, I think you mentioned actually the garbage in, garbage out type of concept. And I think a lot of companies would need to do quite a lot of work to clean up their data footprint and their actual, like, you know, big data, CRM, whatever we want to call it, before they can truly capitalize on any kind of generative AI that is truly outputting something really worth it. But just my final points, because again, I read a McKinsey study which did about 63 use cases within a few industries, and they said that they estimate if generative AI continues at this pace within the marketing kind of department, sales and call centers, that it can generate anything from 2.6 to 4.4 trillion in added value in the coming years, which is, just for comparison, like the UK's GDP in 2021 was 2.6 trillion. So yeah, sorry, 3.1 million. Sorry, I'm confused. So that's like just
big number.
No, so just, yeah, to put it in perspective, it's crazy.
Interesting. Okay. So that makes me wonder. So, Nicola, how are you folks at Yonkers using AI in any kind of way in your marketing activities? If so, how is that being applied, or do you anticipate adopting generative AI or any AI tools in the future in terms of your marketing efforts?
Yeah, certainly. So if I take a step back and look a little bit at the sort of the industry, we translate content, and content is just booming. So Adobe are saying that, you know, content isn't just going to double. Their study this summer showed that content's going to increase between 5 and 20 times. And we're seeing that the way that the content is being consumed is also changing. That people are using more composable models because they're looking for agility, they're looking for data insight, AI-powered automation and scalability of that content. Because it's got a shorter shelf life, because it's being used quicker, we need to sort of work in a continuous localization sort of phase so that that content can reach all of the audiences in their own language and also with their own cultural adaptations. So we're seeing that in the market, and sort of like how we're using that ourselves. We are using and leveraging several sort of MT engines. So we have become MT agnostic so that we can use Google Translate and DeepL and multiple MT engines, because the investment required to develop and maintain these systems is just eye-watering. It's incredible amounts, and it requires incredible sort of levels of expertise and resources to actually create this. So we use this MT engine to start off our localization process. We find the best MT engine for the content type, for the language pairs, and for that use case. And we pre-translate it, if you like, because the other issue is we're not there yet. You know, we are so massively more advanced, but we, you know, these tools have been sort of in various guises that have been here since the 60s. So we're getting there, but we're still not there yet. There are still sort of mistakes that could be made. And it's knowing which elements of that content needs to have a pair of human eyes, check it and check its authenticity and go through it. And so that's why we have humans in the loop as well. So we parse or separate or break down that content into smaller chunks, and then we have linguists from around the world review that content real time in real dashboards giving insight. And that's how we sort of, that's the basic overview of our technology. But how we're using AI, there's various different ways. Because it's such huge volumes of data we're talking about, there needs to be a lot of analysis of that. Quality and things like that are also automated and brought into it. So, I mean, for some customers, we can be doing 1 million words a day. And so you need to be able to make sure that that quality is consistently being checked and verified. And so for us, that's a very important use of AI.
Interesting. All right. Now, Henry, you mentioned when we were talking earlier that really many of these tools have been around already. It seems like we're in sort of a hype cycle right now, but things like data analytics, personalization, these are techniques that have been around for a while. And it seems like AI is enhancing these already familiar and beneficial techniques. Are we just in a hype cycle now, Henry, or is this really is this really a benchmark in the way, or a benchmark in the way that we're doing business?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, you know, I've been working specifically on, you know, what we've referred to as synthetic media before generative AI became the popular term for about six and a half years or so now. And some of the first adopters of this technology really actually were advertisers and marketers. And I'm not talking about using, you know, algorithmic placement for advertising or SEO optimization, for example, but specifically synthetic media, which is highly realistic, mimicking organically captured audio, images, videos, and so on. And some of the earliest examples we saw was, for example, was translation. So essentially taking an audio track, replacing the language, but retaining the speaker's voice, and then synchronizing lip movements. So a company that did this very well was Synthesia. That's a UK company. And they did a campaign with David Beckham, I believe, back in, it must have been 2019, where they got him to do a campaign for malaria prevention in multiple different languages. That same company, Synthesia, have then also gone on to, I believe it was in 2021, to create a campaign with Messi for Lay's, where they allowed users to type in custom kind of sentences, almost like fill in the gaps, which Messi would then speak to them or their friends or family in their specific language, whilst again retaining Messi's accent. So there have been companies that have been playing with this long before DALL-E 2 came out, which was the first of the kind of big AI, Gen AI tools that caught the public attention, and then of course ChatGPT. And that personalization is really continuing. I mean, obviously, if you're a marketer like maybe Trivago, I've seen the adverts. They, you know, play often in, you know, when I'm in hotels around the world, you have different actors potentially coming in to say the same lines, but in different languages. No longer is that necessary. That could then potentially provide a significant saving in the costing of actually getting those adverts out there. But also, as the second example I gave from Synthesia noted, It's about creating entirely new content experiences for audiences which have that personalization, and also new ways for brands to interact and reach out to their audiences. So there are some really positive use cases, and despite the Tom Hanks example being a slightly sinister or scary one, there is a lot to be excited about. And I could go on and on about all the different use cases that we're seeing emerging. Tools like Flare AI that allows you to take an image of your product and then create a photo shoot style campaign using style transfer of the image, you know, saving you potentially money on a big shoot. So lots and lots of exciting use cases. But to come back to your original question, Kevin, yes, this is a big hype cycle at the moment. There is a lot of excitement, and rightly so. But there is also, in my view, an overestimation of the current utility of generative AI in these tools compared to how they can actually be deployed robustly, safely, and responsibly. And I believe Nicola was talking there about having a human in the loop, human oversight, incredibly important, often being left out of the picture when it comes to these conversations. So I think, yes, we will see a correction in the market. We will see this die down. And after we do, the really strong, compelling, you know, monetizable and profitable use cases will remain. And I think a lot will fall to the wayside.
All right, very good. Well, that makes me think, where are we headed with all this? What's the future like in the next, I want to say 5 years, but maybe even just 1 year? And what's your thought? You're the executive director of AI strategy at Cision. So where do you see the horizon in terms of the use of AI in marketing and some of the things that we should be looking for on the horizon then in the next year or two?
Got it. So to answer that question, I think I can set out kind of how I explain those horizons. So obviously, we've been using AI for many years, right? Sentiment analysis is a classic example of something we've been doing for many years. And I would call that, like, if you call that like level one, like an AI assistant to a human, it's basically conducting very narrowly defined tasks and tasks that don't require a lot of context or awareness on behalf of the model. We've been doing that for quite some time. But what happened, I think, if you look at the end part of last year with the release of ChatGPT, is we hit level 2. And obviously, there's different terms bandied around for this. You could call that AI co-pilot, right? This is now effectively a colleague doing tasks that really previously you only use a human for. So generate some social media content for me, generate a press release, or kind of create some social media content from this press release. Tasks that require broader awareness and understanding, that's kind of the level we hit in terms of the technical capability at the end of last year, albeit tools like Jasper have been doing this for many years, but now we've got it in many different industries, right? That level of technology is available, but the challenge for technical providers like Cision and like others in the market is how do we integrate that kind of technical capability into our platforms in a way that makes sense? And that's where we are right now. All of us are working out how to integrate that level of technology into our platforms such that, hey, create some social content for me, analyze all these mentions and give me some insights, analyze this audience for me and tell me what they're thinking. That's the technical capability we have right now and is being integrated right now. But actually, there's a level of exploitation we haven't yet got from the large language models like ChatGPT, which is the next level, that next horizon, which I would call AI autopilot, which is the ability for us to join up those systems in kind of multi-agent systems, each one geared with a specific task and geared around an outcome or a goal, such that you as the human can set the outcome and the AI can only define its own tasks. It can then go and execute those tasks by itself using its knowledge of marketing best practice and communications principles. Yeah. That's the real value of the LLMs, which we've not even begun to touch yet, because figuring out how to integrate that level of capability into our technology, it's going to take us even longer, not from a technical limitation perspective, but from an acceptance, risk, and a kind of a market and a user education perspective. That's what we're having. That's the reason I'm on kind of meetings like this and why I go out into conferences, have these conversations, is we have the technical capability to go beyond where we're at right now, but how far do we want to go? How far can we go? And what are those risks and limitations we need to effectively put in place to make sure we're safeguarding that level of capability? But that's, honestly, we have the technology that's capable of that level of automating an entire workflow. We have the capability. It's just about kind of how we do it and why we do it, not whether can we do it.
Right. All right. We are here today with Deanna Petrova, Nicola Minders, Henry Eider, and Ant Cousins. We're talking about using AI in marketing communications. And if you have a question for our panel today, please feel free to enter them into the main chat feature. We will be attempting to get some questions to our group here in just a few minutes. And indeed, folks, I'm starting to be concerned that we are running through our time very quickly here today. I would like to bring our attention to our next couple of discussion points with that in mind. Understanding the benefits and risks to marketers of deploying AI more broadly, and also setting some guardrails to ensure that you and your teams are using the technology responsibly and profitably. Deanna, tell us a little bit more about how you would suggest to our listeners and our viewers today of setting processes and guardrails in place to not only make sure that we're reaping the benefits that we can expect to get, but also ensuring that our teams are using the technology responsibly. Do you have some suggestions for marketers that are listening and in with us today on how they might proceed?
Yeah, thanks. And, you know, I just wanted to kind of say, I really love how Ant approached the previous question, because I think it's so important for us to be learning as we go on and kind of accept how this starts to fit into the organization. And I think I'm definitely no expert at the moment, so I think I'm learning at the pace with everyone else. I have a vested interest in how this is going to play into an organization. And I think at the moment, unfortunately, without like more set guidelines from, you know, the EU or like more of a global kind of standpoint, my view simplistically on a human level is be honest, try to be as transparent as possible. And exactly that Tesla example, like I think from an organizational point of view and as leaders in companies, because I believe we all are, at the end of the day, we all have a responsibility to kind of call these things out. So for example, whoever is that Tesla person that decided that they're going to just deploy an AI to be chatting to their customers, I think somebody should have said, hey, you know, I think we should put some form of a notification or just like a message that, you know, this person is chatting with an AI, and do they consent or not? And what are we going to do with this data, and how are we going to use it, and so on and so forth. So I think as there are no written rules at the moment, I think a lot has to come from our moral and ethical view as leaders and how we lead our teams on that path. So whenever we are creating content or whenever we are creating these types of innovations across the companies we work with, I think it's really important to put that lens of transparency. And that's probably the one thing I'm going to call for everyone and just put it out there, is being as transparent as possible whenever AI has been used to generate whatever collateral or project or whatever you're working on, in case it's touching customers and humans on the other side. I think it just has to be as transparent as possible.
Interesting. Of course, transparency, I think, is super important. But Nicola, could transparency and overt transparency be one way to sort of circumvent the risks? In other words, Deanna mentioned the Tesla example. Maybe what we do is we're super transparent. This is an AI bot. Yeah, hello. You know, absolutely, we're using AI. You know, it's no secret here. And here's our message. And sort of flip that risk. Nicola, do you feel that might be a strategy you might recommend to other marketers?
I do. I mean, transparency, I think, is key. And I think human oversight is also key, but also just common sense. I mean, as you mentioned before, the phrase co-pilot. Yeah, it's like having the most powerful, most intelligent person right next to you who's got as much time as they need to be able to answer all of your questions, to supercharge you. But do they have human empathy? Do they have any human learning experience? And I recently saw a TED talk on this, and it's sort of like there's literally new groups forming to make sure that they have human experiences and empathy for questions and logic that we can understand, they can't understand. So it's incredibly bright, but it's also book clever, if you know the expression, that they can understand everything literally from a book, from all of the data that's been put in there, but can they be pragmatic and practical about it? Can they show human empathy and compassion for one another? You know, we like to think that, and I believe that most people on the planet are good, kind people who want to help each other. But there are also that tiny percentage of people who want to abuse power. And so it does need to have an element of oversight and control in order to go that much further. Because it's a tool at the end of the day, and how that tool is used is down to human creativity. It's down to human endeavors to use it in more innovative and practical ways. One example that I saw recently was IKEA. So IKEA basically leveraged AI in their service chatbot, Billy, and they basically are now answering 50% of their service queries through the chatbot successfully, which has freed up time from their service consultants. And they've turned sort of service, which is often seen as a cost center, into a revenue driver, because these service people now are trained up as interior decorators and interior designers. And if you have your room designed by IKEA and you see all of their products in your environment, you're going to be really hooked. And I found that a really powerful case. And the return on investment was phenomenal. They made 1.4 billion from this whole thing of turning a cost center into a revenue. And that was through human creativity and using an AI tool to the best advantage.
All right. Now, Henry, where is the future taking us? You work in this area quite extensively. Can you comment on putting guardrails and processes into place to make sure that we're getting both the benefits of AI in marketing and also using the technology responsibly?
Certainly, and I'll try and keep it as succinct as I can given the time. So it's all well and good talking about common sense, doing the right thing, being kind, etc. And I agree. At the same time, legislators will be coming with rules that you will have to follow. We have seen these coming forth in the EU AI Act. We've seen these being floated in the UK's white paper on AI legislation. We've seen this from the White House commitment that was recently released the other week, where disclosure and transparency were key commitments. Similar to how the EU has used these kinds of codes of practice in the past, these are essentially signposts of future legislation. They bridge the gap. So in the EU AI Act, for example, certain use cases of AI are classified as high risk, including many which are generative, which would encompass generative AI. That comes with burdensome auditing and safety procedures that companies have to comply with around data, disclosure, training, bias, and audience selection and things like this. So as much as, yes, there are things that we can do for the good of our own heart, there will be laws that will come in and will have punitive measures in place if people do not comply. In terms of guardrails, yes, disclosure, transparency, very important. Something I worked on as a lead advisor on the Partnership on AI's framework for responsible synthetic media. There's a lot of questions, and I'd recommend your audience check this out if they're thinking about what kind of disclosure to use. There are a lot of different approaches, and they're not all the same, and they're not all as robust and appropriate as others for different contexts. So it's important to understand, well, how am I going to actually consistently and effectively communicate this to an audience which might be global, which might not have the same media literacy across the board, for example? This advert might be shared in a small window on TikTok. It might be shared on a billboard. There are many different contexts. So understanding the right kind of disclosure is also very important. And then I think the final point for me, in terms of not necessarily guardrails, but just best practice, is understand whether what you're doing is essentially, is it simply novelty, or is it actually revolutionary for your business? Are you just doing this for the sake of it, like we saw many companies do with metaverse applications, building very poor quality, kind of janky, bad looking metaverses for their companies that were trying to just jump on the bandwagon, didn't produce much value? We're seeing similar examples, in my view, with generative AI. There are some really impactful ones, but I think it's about understanding, is this actually going to make a difference? And is this going to resonate with my audiences? Or does this just look like a bit of a desperate attempt to jump on the hype train?
All right, very good. All right. Before we run out of time, I do want to get to Ant. Ant, now you have some perspective that you want to share on what brands can do before legislation. In the time that we have left, can you tell us a little bit more?
So super quickly, every brand has values, and they need to be acting in line with those values, because transparency and honesty are key to brand trust, right? So you don't necessarily need to wait for legislation or guidance to come out to act in line with your own brand values. So making sure you are kind of in alignment with that, making sure you're publishing that and acting in accordance with that, you can do that right now. And I think the one piece of advice, I'm super quick, is you won't be penalized for over transparency or for over honesty over what you're using AI. You will be penalized for the opposite. So oversharing in terms of transparency and honesty is my advice. Don't necessarily wait for legislation.
All right, thank you, Ant. All right, we are here today with Deanna Petrova, Nicola Minders, Henry Eider, and Ant Cousins. We've been talking about using AI in marketing communications. Now, folks, we have reached the action item round of our presentation today. I was hoping that each of you could provide us with one quick action item that our attendees today can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice here today. Deanna, do you have an action item for us today?
Yeah, I'll be super quick as well. I think it's really important for us on a human level in this very digital world nowadays to actually take the organizations we work with on a little bit of a journey and just educate and also support our team members to be making that transition into this new world, because marketing is going to change. So is, the digital marketing, technology, and so on and so forth. So people who worked in jobs that have been there for quite some time and have gotten into a certain rhythm, it is going to be shaken up. And I think there is, again, a responsibility on leadership within companies to make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible and these skill sets are kind of supported as this is developing. Because as much as some of it is going to be kind of a hype that's going to die down, I think the aspect of every company looking for efficiencies through AI and hopefully successfully in the future, I don't think that's going to die down anytime soon. So it is the future and we kind of need to prepare for it.
Thank you, Deanna. Nicola, do you have an action item for us today?
So as an action item, I would say, don't spam at scale. You've got an incredibly powerful tool there. Make sure you're creative. Make sure you edit heavily everything that comes out and use your own personal experience. Will this resonate? Will this educate, entertain, and engage my audience? Will it convert them to the next stage? Always just take a step back before you press that publish button and cut. Make sure that you edit and cut so that you only get the quality out. Don't spam at scale.
That is Nicola Minders. Nicola, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Henry, do you have an action item for us today?
Yeah, so I think my action item would be consider your foundations, whether that is your data. That's one of the biggest obstacles I see is companies that want to implement but have very messy, unaligned data, which has not been cleaned up and is not ready for use. So make sure your data is ready. It has been sufficiently polished, so to speak, vetted for bias, vetted for essentially proximity to what you're trying to achieve. And then the second thing would be make sure you're using the right models for the job you want and for the vision you have. Many companies are investing a huge amount of money in trying to build their own proprietary or modified open source models without really knowing what the actual return on investment is going to be. Some companies are using third-party tools like the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Bards, in the LLM space, again, have their downsides and upsides. And the same goes for implementing specific open source code. So I guess my point would be consider carefully which approach you want to take and which one is going to have the best return on investment for your business.
All right, great advice. That is Henry Eider. And finally, Ant Cousins. Ant, can you give us an action item today?
Yes, with my own interests at heart, speak to your providers. So if you're using technology and you're trying to figure out how to use AI, you have specific interests for things you want to use AI for, or even concerns, of how AI will be used. Speak to your providers, have those kind of conversations, because people like me in Cision or in Brandwatch or across this market, we're trying to figure out what the appropriate use of AI is in this space. It needs to be a conversation. So, the reason I'm on these kind of things is because I'm trying to get that feedback and trying to stoke that debate. So please go to your providers, have those conversations, tell them what you want, tell them what you're afraid of. That's really valuable for us and will lead to better outcomes in the future.
Very good. That is Anthony Cousins. Ant, thank you so much, along with Deanna Petrova, Nicola Minders, and Henry Eider. We could speak for another hour and still not get to even 1% of the great knowledge in this group. Thank you so much for being with us today. Your comments and perspectives were spot on, and I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. And thanks to everyone joining us today. Thank you, too. Join us next time on October 17th at 1600 British time when we will talk with another great panel of guests about unlocking the power of AI for better partner ROI. That should be another great discussion. And meanwhile, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. Check me out. I'm Kevin Crane. And check out my weekly audio podcast, Everyday MBA. But that will do it for this episode of MarTech Talk. Until next time, I am Kevin Crane. Thank you for watching.